I stood frozen in the hallway of my son's house, my hand still on the doorknob I'd just opened. Through the crack I could hear voices coming from the living room, my daughter-in-law Patricia's sharp tone cutting through the air like a knife. "She's too old to understand," she said, and I heard my son Marcus laugh in agreement. "Mom's been losing it for months now. We need to make the decisions for her." My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized they were talking about me. Me, Evelyn Crawford, who had raised Marcus alone after his father died, who had worked 2 jobs to put him through college, who had never asked for anything in return. And now, at 72 years old, I was apparently too senile to understand my own life. I carefully closed the door and stepped back into the cool evening air, my mind racing. They had no idea I'd heard them. They had no idea what I was capable of. And they were about to learn that age had given me something far more powerful than they could imagine. Patience, wisdom, and an ironclad will to prove them spectacularly wrong. My name is Evelyn Crawford, and for the past 3 years, I've been the silent observer in my own family's affairs. After I broke my hip in a fall, Marcus insisted I move closer to him. "We'll take better care of you, Mom," he'd said, his voice so sincere I believed every word. I sold my little house in Oregon, the one Robert and I had bought 40 years ago, the one where I'd raised Marcus, the one filled with memories in every corner, and moved to Connecticut to be near them. Seemed like the right choice at the time. Marcus was my only child, and Patricia seemed welcoming enough, though there was always something calculating behind her smile. The first few months were pleasant enough. They'd converted their guest house into a small apartment for me, and I appreciated the independence while still being close to family. I got to see my grandchildren Sophie and Jake, who were 12 and 10 then. Those kids were the light of my life. Sophie had my love for reading, and Jake had inherited his grandfather's quick wit. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Patricia started making comments about my forgetfulness when I'd misplace my reading glasses. Marcus would exchange meaningful looks with her when I'd repeat a story I'd already told. They began speaking about me in the third person even when I was in the room. "Does she need her medication?" Patricia would ask Marcus while I sat right there at the dinner table. "Did she remember to lock her door?" Marcus would wonder aloud, as if I couldn't hear him or answer for myself. It was a gradual erosion of my personhood, so subtle that at first I questioned whether I was being oversensitive. After all, I was getting older. Maybe I was forgetting things more often. Maybe my reflexes weren't what they used to be. But I wasn't losing my mind. I was sharp as ever. I did the New York Times crossword every morning. I managed my own finances. I read voraciously, and I could recall details from decades ago with perfect clarity. What I was losing was something else entirely: my voice in my own family. Every suggestion I made was met with a patronizing smile. Every opinion I offered was gently dismissed. When I wanted to renew my driver's license, Patricia convinced Marcus it was too dangerous, and they simply didn't take me to the appointment. When I mentioned wanting to volunteer at the local library, Marcus said I should rest more and not overexert myself. The truth was I'd become convenient. I was the live-in babysitter who didn't need to be paid. I was the one who cooked dinner 4 nights a week while Patricia worked late. I was the one who did their laundry, tended their garden, and waited for the repair people when they couldn't take time off work. But I was never consulted about family decisions. I was never asked for my opinion on anything important. I was useful labor, but my thoughts, my experiences, my wisdom, all of it was dismissed as the confused ramblings of someone too old to understand. That night when I overheard their conversation, something crystallized in my mind. I'd been making excuses for their behavior, telling myself they meant well, that they were just worried about me. But standing outside that door, listening to them laugh about my supposed cognitive decline, I finally saw the situation for what it was. I was being managed, marginalized, and manipulated. And I'd been complicit in my own diminishment by staying quiet, by not making waves, by being the agreeable mother who didn't want to cause trouble. I walked back to my little guest house apartment, my hip aching from the longer walk into town I'd taken earlier. I sat in my reading chair, the one piece of furniture I'd brought from my old house, and looked around at my small domain. This wasn't my home. These weren't my things. This wasn't my life. I'd given up everything to be close to family, and in return, I'd become invisible. No, worse than invisible. I'd become a problem to be solved, a responsibility to be managed, an old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own affairs. But they'd made a critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. They thought age had made me weak, compliant, confused. They had no idea that I'd spent 50 years as a legal secretary at one of Portland's most prestigious law firms. They didn't know that I'd learned more about contracts, estates, and property law than most people learn in law school. They certainly didn't realize that I'd maintained my professional network, kept my mind sharp, and knew exactly what my rights were. As I sat there in the growing darkness, a plan began to form. I wouldn't confront them directly. That would be dismissed as an emotional outburst from a confused old woman. I wouldn't argue or plead. That would only confirm their narrative that I was losing my grip on reality. No, I would do something far more effective. I would show them, through actions rather than words, exactly how capable I still was. And in the process, I would reclaim not just my independence but my identity. The next morning, I acted as though nothing had happened. I made breakfast for the kids before school, chatted pleasantly with Patricia about the weather, and told Marcus I hoped he'd have a good day at work. If they noticed anything different about me, they didn't show it. Why would they? In their minds, I was predictable, manageable, safely contained in their guest house, grateful for their charity in letting me stay close. After everyone left, I made a phone call. Margaret? It's Evelyn Crawford. Yes, it's been too long. Listen, I need some advice. Margaret Chun had been a senior partner at the firm where I'd worked. We'd remained friends through the years, exchanging Christmas cards and occasional calls. She was 75 now, still sharp as a tack, and still consulting on complex cases. Evelyn, what a wonderful surprise. What can I help you with? Her voice was warm but professional, sliding easily into problem-solving mode. I explained my situation, not emotionally but factually, laying out the details like the case summary it was. Margaret listened without interrupting, the way she'd always done when analyzing a legal problem. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then Margaret said, Evelyn, what they're doing has a name. It's called diminishment of capacity, and it's often the first step toward undue influence. They're creating a narrative about your incompetence. Has there been any talk about your finances? Your property? Power of attorney? My blood ran cold. Patricia mentioned a few months ago that it would be easier if Marcus had power of attorney, just in case something happened to me. She said it was standard for people my age. And did you sign anything? Margaret's voice had taken on an edge. Nothing yet. I kept putting it off, saying I'd think about it. They seemed annoyed but didn't push too hard. Good. Don't sign anything. Evelyn, I'm going to be blunt with you. This pattern, moving you away from your home, isolating you, creating a narrative of incompetence, pushing for financial control. These are classic signs of elder financial abuse, even if they haven't succeeded yet. Your son may not even realize what he's doing. His wife, however. She let the sentence hang. If you're finding this story eye-opening, consider subscribing for more narratives about standing up for yourself and recognizing manipulation. I felt vindicated and horrified at the same time. Vindicated because I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. There really was something wrong. Horrified because my own son was part of it. What should I do? First, you need to establish your competency beyond any doubt. I want you to see a geriatric specialist. I'll refer you to someone excellent in your area. Get a full cognitive assessment. Document that you're of sound mind. Second, you need to secure your finances. Do they have access to your accounts? No, I've kept everything separate. I still have the money from selling my house, plus my savings and Robert's life insurance. Excellent. Keep it that way. Third, and this is important, start documenting everything. Every conversation where they dismiss you, every decision they make without consulting you, every time they treat you as incompetent. Dates, times, witnesses if possible. Can you do that? I can do that, I said, feeling a spark of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Margaret, thank you. Oh, I'm not done. I'm coming to visit you next week. We're going to have lunch, and I'm going to see this situation for myself. And Evelyn, you're not alone in this. You're one of the sharpest people I've ever worked with. Don't let anyone make you forget that. After I hung up, I sat for a moment, absorbing what Margaret had said. Elder financial abuse. Sounded so stark, so criminal. Surely Marcus wouldn't deliberately hurt me? But then I remembered his laugh when Patricia said I was too old to understand. I remembered the way he'd taken over conversations with my doctor, answering questions directed at me. I remembered how he'd helped me set up my computer, then seemed to know things about my emails and online activity. How he'd insisted on having a key to my apartment just in case. How he'd suggested I add him to my bank accounts to make things easier. I'd refused most of it, but only because something in my gut had warned me. Now I understood why. Some part of me had recognized the danger, even when my conscious mind was making excuses for their behavior. That afternoon I called Dr. Williams, the referral Margaret had given me. Her receptionist was initially hesitant. They were booked out for months. But when I mentioned Margaret's name and explained I needed a competency assessment, her tone changed. "We can fit you in next Tuesday at 2. Dr. Williams says it's important." "I'll be there," I said. Then I paused. "I'll need to arrange my own transportation. Can you recommend a car service?" "Of course. I'll email you some options." After I hung up, I realized I was smiling. I was making my own appointments, arranging my own transportation, taking control of my own life. It felt revolutionary. For 3 years I'd let Marcus and Patricia drive me everywhere, tell me where I could go, manage my schedule. I thought I was being accommodating. I thought I was being a good guest in their lives. Now I saw it for what it was. Learned helplessness, carefully cultivated. That evening at dinner, Patricia announced they'd be going to their lake house for the weekend. "You'll be all right here alone, won't you, Evelyn? Sophie and Jake are excited about the trip, and we could all use a break." There was something pointed in the way she said it, as if I were the source of stress they needed to escape from. "Of course," I said mildly. "I'll enjoy the quiet time. Maybe I'll finally finish that mystery novel I've been reading." Marcus looked relieved. "We'll leave Friday after work and be back Sunday evening. There's food in the freezer. You remember how to use the microwave, right?" I bit back the sharp response that rose to my lips. I remembered how to use a microwave. I'd been cooking since before he was born. Instead, I smiled and said, "I'll manage." After they left on Friday, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. The house was mine. I could eat when I wanted, read without interruption, think without someone monitoring my every action for signs of decline. But I didn't spend the weekend relaxing. I spent it investigating. I started with my own apartment, looking at it with fresh eyes. The lock on my door was standard, nothing special. I checked my computer. Marcus had set it up for me, insisted on it. I thought he was being helpful. Now I looked closer at the settings. He'd set himself as the administrator. He had access to all my files, my browsing history, everything. My email was set to forward copies to an address I didn't recognize. My banking apps all had his phone number listed as a backup for password recovery. My hands shook as I discovered each invasion. He'd been monitoring me. Not just dismissing me or managing me, actively surveilling me. Every website I visited, every email I sent, every financial transaction I made, he could see all of it. And I'd let him do it, thinking he was helping his technologically challenged mother set up her computer. I spent Saturday systematically removing his access from everything. I changed every password, removed every backup number that wasn't mine, disabled every share setting. I documented each one with screenshots, following Margaret's advice. Then I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I called a real estate agent. "I'm looking for a rental," I told the cheerful woman who answered. "A 1-bedroom apartment or small house. Ground floor preferred because of my hip, but I can manage a few stairs. Something with character if possible. And I need it to allow a small dog." "A dog?" she asked. "Do you have one?" "Not yet," I said, surprising myself. "But I've wanted one for years. My late husband was allergic, and then I thought I was too old to take on the responsibility. But I think a dog might be exactly what I need." I scheduled 3 viewings for the following week. Then I researched senior apartments, independent living communities, and accessible housing options. Not because I needed them, I was perfectly capable of living independently, but because I wanted to understand all my options. I wanted to make an informed choice about my own life. Sunday evening, when they returned from their lake trip, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Patricia walked in with that assessing look she always had, as if checking whether I'd burned down the house or injured myself in their absence. How was your weekend, Evelyn? She asked, setting her designer bag on the counter. Any problems? Not at all, I said, stirring the pasta sauce. It was wonderfully peaceful. I got a lot done. Done. Marcus came into the kitchen carrying sleeping Jake. What did you get done, Mom? Oh, just some organizing. Clearing out digital clutter, that sort of thing. I kept my voice light, but I saw Patricia and Marcus exchange a look. They were wondering if I'd accidentally deleted something important, if I'd confused myself with technology, if they'd need to fix whatever mess I'd made. Do you need help with your computer? Marcus asked. Sometimes updates can be confusing. No, I'm fine. Everything's working perfectly now. It wasn't until Monday evening that Marcus discovered what I'd done. He knocked on my apartment door, his phone in his hand, his expression confused and slightly irritated. Mom, I tried to log into your email to update the spam filter, and my password doesn't work. Did you change it? I looked up from my book. I did. I realized you've been accessing my accounts, so I secured them. That's what you're supposed to do for digital safety, isn't it? His confusion deepened. But I set up those accounts for you. I need access in case something goes wrong. Marcus, I worked with computers for 20 years. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own email. If something goes wrong, I'll handle it. I returned to my book, dismissing him as casually as he'd dismissed me 1,000 times. He stood there for a moment, clearly unsure how to respond. This wasn't how I usually acted. Normally, I'd apologize for causing inconvenience, explain that I must have clicked something by mistake, ask him to fix it. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was done apologizing for taking up space in my own life. Patricia thinks maybe you should let me handle the technical stuff, he said finally. She's worried you might accidentally lock yourself out of important accounts. Patricia can think whatever she likes. These are my accounts, Marcus. Private means private. He left, clearly frustrated, and I heard him talking to Patricia in the main house. Their voices carried through the evening air, though I couldn't make out the words. I imagined the conversation. Mom's being difficult. She's getting paranoid. This might be a sign of something serious. We need to do something. Let them think that. Let them underestimate me. I was counting on it. Tuesday, I took a car service to Dr. Williams' office. The driver was a kind man named Joseph who didn't ask questions when I requested he wait and drive me back. The assessment took 3 hours. Dr. Williams was thorough: cognitive tests, memory evaluations, problem-solving exercises, questions about my daily life and decision-making abilities. At the end, she looked at me over her reading glasses. Mrs. Crawford, you score in the 95th percentile for your age group. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning skills are sharp, and you show no signs of cognitive decline. In fact, you're functioning at a level that would be impressive for someone 20 years younger. I'll prepare a formal report documenting this, which you can use as needed. Thank you, I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It was one thing to know in my heart that I was competent. It was another to have medical documentation proving it. I will say, Dr. Williams continued, that Margaret briefed me on your situation. I've seen this pattern before. Family members sometimes infantilize their elderly relatives, either out of misplaced concern or, unfortunately, out of self-interest. The fact that you recognized it and sought assessment shows excellent judgment. What's your plan going forward? I'm reclaiming my independence, I said. Starting with my own apartment. Good. You're clearly capable of independent living. If you need additional documentation for housing applications or any other purpose, don't hesitate to call. And Mrs. Crawford? Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself. Age brings wisdom, not weakness. I left her office feeling 10 feet tall. I had my proof. I had my documentation. I had my plan. Now I just needed to execute it. The following day, I looked at apartments. The first was sterile and depressing, clearly designed for people who needed assistance rather than independence. The second was lovely but on the 3rd floor with no elevator. The third was perfect, a small 2-bedroom cottage behind a larger house, owned by a widow named Clara who was looking for a quiet tenant. It had a garden, hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and a landlord who immediately reminded me of my old friends from Oregon. I love it, I told Clara. When could I move in? First of the month if you'd like. Can you provide references? I gave her Margaret's number, my former employer, and my bank manager. I should mention, I'm hoping to adopt a small dog soon. Is that acceptable? Clara's face lit up. Oh, I'd love that. My biscuit passed last year, and I miss having a dog around. As long as it's friendly and you clean up after it, absolutely. We shook hands, and I wrote her a check for first month's rent and security deposit. As I handed it to her, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. This was my choice. My money. My future. I'll need to give my current living situation a month's notice, I said. Is that all right? Of course. Take your time. The cottage will be here waiting for you. On the drive back, I allowed myself a moment of uncertainty. Was I being rash? Was I overreacting? But then I remembered Patricia's voice. She's too old to understand. I remembered Marcus's laugh. I remembered every small dismissal, every patronizing comment, every decision made without my input. No, I wasn't overreacting. I was finally reacting appropriately. That evening I started packing. Not obviously, just sorting through my things, making decisions about what to keep and what to donate. I had a month. I'd use it well. The first sign that Marcus and Patricia suspected something came a week later. I'd been researching animal shelters, looking at adoptable dogs online, when Patricia knocked on my door. Evelyn, do you have a minute? Marcus and I want to talk to you about something. My heart rate increased, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course. Come in. They sat on my small couch, looking serious and concerned in that way that had become familiar. This was the expression they wore when they were about to tell me what was best for me. Mom, Marcus began. We've noticed some changes in your behavior lately. You're being secretive with your accounts, you've been going out without telling us where. And Patricia found some notes you'd left out about apartments and dogs. We're worried about you. I'd actually left those notes out deliberately, testing to see if they were going through my things. Now I had my answer. Worried about what, specifically? Patricia leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. Evelyn, we love you. We just want to make sure you're safe. These sudden decisions, changing your passwords, looking at apartments, talking about getting a dog, they're not like you. They seem impulsive. Have you been feeling confused? Anxious? There it was. The narrative they were building. Sudden personality changes, impulsive decisions, confusion. All signs of cognitive decline. If I moved out, they could say I'd made the decision while not in my right mind. They could contest it, maybe even try to get guardianship. I'm not confused, I said calmly. I'm making deliberate, considered choices about my future. I'm 72, not incapacitated. I'm allowed to make decisions about my own life. Of course you are, Marcus said quickly. We're not saying you can't make decisions. We just think maybe you should discuss big changes with us first. We can help you think through the pros and cons. The way you helped me think through whether to renew my driver's license, or volunteer at the library, or manage my own email. I kept my voice level, but I saw them realize I wasn't going to back down this time. Mom, this isn't like you. You're usually so reasonable. Marcus looked genuinely confused, as if I were a puzzle piece that no longer fit where he'd placed it. No, Marcus. I'm usually so compliant. There's a difference. Patricia's expression hardened slightly. We're just trying to look out for you. At your age, living alone could be dangerous. What if you fall again? What if something happens and no one's there to help? Then I'll call 911 like any other adult. Patricia, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not an invalid. I'm a capable woman who's lived independently for most of her life. Living in your guest house was supposed to be temporary. A recovery period after my hip healed. It's been 3 years. I'm ready to have my own space again. They looked at each other, and I could see them recalibrating. They'd expected me to back down, to apologize, to be swayed by their concerns. Instead, they were facing someone who'd made up her mind. Let's not make any hasty decisions, Marcus said finally. Just promise us you'll take some time to think about this. Maybe talk to your doctor. I've already talked to my doctor, I said. Dr. Williams gave me a full cognitive assessment. I'm happy to share the results with you, though they're really none of your business. I'm of sound mind, capable of independent living, and making my own informed choices. I'll be moving out at the end of the month. The silence that followed was profound. Patricia's mask of concern slipped slightly, revealing something colder underneath. Marcus just looked shocked. "You went to a doctor without telling us?" he asked. "Marcus, I'm an adult. I don't need permission to see a doctor." "But how did you even get there? You don't drive anymore." "I hired a car service." Again, something adults do regularly. Patricia stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Evelyn, you're being stubborn and irrational. You can't just move out. You sold your house. You have nowhere to go. You'd end up in some depressing senior facility. Actually, I've rented a lovely cottage. It's in a good neighborhood, has a garden and allows pets. I move in on the 1st. Now they both looked genuinely alarmed. This wasn't hypothetical anymore. I'd made concrete plans, signed a lease, prepared to leave. Their convenient live-in help, their project to manage was leaving. "We need to discuss this more," Marcus said. "This is a big decision. You can't just—" "Yes, I can. And I have. This conversation is a courtesy, not a request for permission. I'm telling you my plans out of respect, but make no mistake, I'm not asking for your approval." After they left, I heard them arguing in the main house. Patricia's voice was sharp, angry. Marcus sounded defensive. I couldn't make out the words, but I could guess the content. She was probably blaming him for not controlling me better, for not getting power of attorney when she'd suggested it. He was probably defending himself, saying he'd tried, that I was being difficult. Let them argue. I had work to do. I called Margaret and updated her on the situation. "They're going to escalate," Margaret warned. "They've lost control of the narrative, and they're going to try to regain it. Be prepared for them to call other family members, maybe even try to involve social services. They might claim you're a danger to yourself." "Can they do that?" "They can try. But you have documentation of your competency. You have a plan for independent living. You have financial resources. Unless they can prove you're genuinely incapacitated, there's nothing they can legally do to stop you. But that won't stop them from trying to manipulate you emotionally." She was right. Over the next week, Marcus tried everything. He brought Sophie and Jake to my apartment to ask tearfully if I was leaving because I didn't love them anymore. He had his aunt, my late husband's sister, call to express concern about my sudden personality change. He scheduled an appointment with my regular doctor and tried to convince me to let him attend. I handled each attempt calmly. I assured Sophie and Jake that I loved them dearly and would see them regularly, that I was moving because I needed my own space, not because of anything they'd done. I politely told my sister-in-law that I was fine and making positive changes in my life. I went to my doctor's appointment alone and asked him to note in my chart that I was of sound mind and making independent decisions about my housing. The hardest moment came 2 weeks before my move date. I came back from a shopping trip to find Patricia in my apartment, going through my papers. She didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed when I walked in. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice cold. "I was looking for your lease agreement. Marcus and I want to make sure this place you're renting is legitimate. There are so many scams targeting seniors. Get out." She blinked, surprised by my tone. "Evelyn, I'm just trying to help. Get out of my apartment. Now. And give me back the key." "I don't think that's a good idea. What if there's an emergency?" I pulled out my phone. "Patricia, you have 2 choices. You can give me that key and leave right now, or I can call the police and report you for trespassing. Choose." For a moment I thought she might refuse. Then she practically threw the key at me and stalked out, slamming the door behind her. I heard her march across the yard to the main house, heard her telling Marcus about how I'd threatened her, how I was becoming hostile and paranoid. That night, Marcus knocked on my door. When I opened it, he looked tired and sad. "Mom, Patricia told me what happened. I know she shouldn't have been in here, but you really hurt her feelings. She's been crying all evening." "Marcus, she was going through my private papers without permission. That's a violation, not a kindness. I have a right to privacy. But we're family. We don't have secrets from each other." "Marcus, everyone has a right to privacy, even within families. Especially within families. And the fact that you don't understand that is part of why I need my own space." He looked at me like he'd never seen me before. When did you become so cold? The question stung, but I held my ground. I'm not cold. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. This isn't you, Mom. The mother I know would never. The mother you know let you make all her decisions for her. Let you treat her like a child. Let you and your wife discuss her in the third person while she was sitting right there. You're right, Marcus. That isn't me anymore. Maybe it never really was, and I just forgot for a while. He left without another word, and I heard him drive away. He didn't come home until very late. The next morning, neither he nor Patricia acknowledged me. The children looked confused and sad. I felt guilty, wondering if I was being too harsh, if I was destroying my relationship with my only child over my pride. But then I remembered. She's too old to understand. I remembered his laugh, and I knew I was doing the right thing even if it hurt. The week before my move, I hired movers. I didn't have much. Most of the furniture in the apartment belonged to Marcus and Patricia. But I had my books, my clothes, my reading chair, the photo albums and mementos from my life with Robert. I had everything that mattered. On moving day, Marcus was conspicuously absent. He'd left for work early and texted to say he'd be late coming home. Patricia watched from the main house window as the movers loaded my things, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When everything was packed, I walked to the main house one last time. I let myself in. I still had the key to the main house, though they'd taken back the one to my apartment, and left an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a letter I'd spent 3 drafts writing. Marcus and Patricia, it began. I'm leaving today, as I told you I would. I want you to understand that this decision isn't impulsive or irrational. It's the result of 3 years of careful observation and consideration. I moved here hoping to be closer to family, to be part of your lives in a meaningful way. Instead, I became invisible, useful for babysitting and household chores, but not valued for my thoughts, my experiences, or my personhood. I overheard you that night 3 weeks ago saying I was too old to understand. You laughed about my supposed decline. That moment crystallized something I've been feeling for months. You don't see me as a person anymore. You see me as a responsibility, a problem, someone to be managed rather than respected. I want you to know that I'm not angry. I'm disappointed, but I'm not angry. I understand that ageism is so deeply ingrained in our culture that you probably don't even recognize what you've been doing. You genuinely believe you were helping me, protecting me. But in the process, you were diminishing me, taking away my agency, treating me as less capable than I am. I'm 72 years old. I have a sharp mind, a healthy body, and at least another decade or 2 of good living ahead of me. I refuse to spend those years being treated as if I'm already gone. I have my own apartment, my own plans, and my own life to live. I love you both. I love Sophie and Jake. I hope we can rebuild our relationship on better terms. Terms where I'm treated as an equal adult, not as a dependent child. But if that's not possible, I'll accept it. I'd rather be alone and respected than surrounded by family and diminished. You can reach me at my new number. I've had my cell phone plan separated from your family plan. My new address is enclosed. I'll be hosting a small housewarming in 2 weeks, and you're welcome to attend if you can treat me with the respect I deserve. Love, Mom. I left the letter and walked out. Clara was waiting at my new cottage with cookies and a welcome sign. As I walked through my new front door, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years free. The first week in my cottage was bliss. I arranged my books just how I wanted them. I set up my little kitchen with the dishes I'd ordered. I planted herbs in the garden boxes Clara had installed. I adopted a small terrier mix from the local shelter. A sweet 7-year-old named Milo who'd been overlooked because people wanted puppies. Milo and I understood each other perfectly. Both of us underestimated because of our age. Both of us with plenty of life left to live. Marcus didn't call for 10 days. Then late on a Thursday evening my new phone rang. Mom. His voice was quiet, unsure. Hello, Marcus. I got your letter. I've read it about a dozen times. I waited. I wasn't going to make this easier for him by filling the silence. I didn't realize, he said finally. I thought we were helping. Patricia convinced me you were declining and I believed her because it was easier, I guess. Easier than admitting my mom was getting older. Easier than confronting my own fears about aging and mortality. And I prompted when he paused. And you were right. We treated you terribly. I treated you terribly. I'm so sorry, Mom. Tears pricked my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. Can I come see you? See your new place? Of course. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. If you come here, you come as a guest in my home, not as a caretaker checking on my welfare. Can you do that? I can. I will. He came over the next evening alone. He brought flowers and looked genuinely nervous as I gave him the tour. He admired the cottage, laughed when Milo jumped on his lap, and seemed amazed by how well I'd set everything up. This is really nice, Mom. You did good. I know, I said, not modestly but matter-of-factly. I'm quite capable when I'm allowed to be. He winced. I deserved that. He paused, then asked, How did you know? How did you know it was time to leave? I told him about overhearing their conversation. About the shock of realization, the careful planning, the documentation of my competency. As I spoke, I watched his expression change, shame, regret, recognition. That night, he said slowly. God, I remember that night. Patricia had been talking about getting power of attorney again, and I was frustrated because you kept putting us off. She said you were too old to understand why it was important. I laughed because she was voicing something I'd been thinking but hadn't wanted to admit. That maybe you weren't capable of making good decisions anymore. But I was, I said quietly. I was making the best decision I could make. Not giving up control of my life to people who saw me as incompetent. You were right not to trust us. He looked at me directly. Mom, I need to tell you something. Patricia has been struggling. She lost her job 8 months ago and hasn't told her parents. We have debts I didn't know about. When she suggested the power of attorney thing, I think she was hoping to, I don't know, maybe access your savings? Use your credit? I didn't see it then, but looking back now, my blood ran cold. Margaret had been right. This hadn't just been about ageist attitudes. There had been a financial component. If I'd signed over power of attorney, who knows what would have happened to the money Robert and I had spent a lifetime saving. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did you know? Did you know she was planning to use my finances? He shook his head emphatically. No. I swear, Mom. I thought we were just trying to make things easier for you. But I should have seen it. The way she kept pushing, the way she got angry when you resisted. I should have protected you instead of siding with her. You're still married to her, I pointed out. How are you handling that? We're in counseling. She needs help. Real help with her spending, her deception, her control issues. And I need help understanding why I was so willing to discount my own mother's competence. If she won't do the work, if things don't change. He trailed off, but the implication was clear. We talked for 2 more hours. Really talked the way we hadn't in years. I told him about my life in Oregon before he was born, stories he'd never heard. He told me about his fears, his struggles, his realization that he'd been so focused on managing others that he'd lost touch with himself. When he left, he hugged me tight. I'm proud of you, Mom. I know I should have been proud of you all along, but I'm especially proud of you for this, for standing up for yourself even when it meant standing up to me. The housewarming party 2 weeks later was small but meaningful. Margaret came, traveling from Oregon just for the occasion. Clara was there, of course, along with some of her friends who'd become my friends. Marcus came with Sophie and Jake, though Patricia declined to attend, which was probably for the best. A few neighbors I'd gotten to know. Dr. Williams stopped by with a beautiful plant for my garden. We stood in my little cottage, surrounded by my books and my things and my new life, and I felt whole in a way I hadn't in years. Sophie helped me arrange appetizers while Jake played with Milo in the garden. Marcus helped Clara fix a loose hinge on one of the cabinets. Margaret regaled everyone with stories from our days at the law firm, making me sound far more impressive than I'd ever thought I was. A toast, Margaret said, raising her glass of wine. To Evelyn, who proved that age is just a number, and competence never expires. To standing up for yourself, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. To Grandma, Sophie added. The coolest old lady I know. Everyone laughed, and I didn't even mind being called an old lady. Because I was old, older than I sometimes felt, older than society thought was valuable. But I was also strong, capable, and independent. Age and ability weren't mutually exclusive. After everyone left and the cottage was quiet, I sat in my reading chair with Milo curled at my feet and reflected on the journey. 3 months ago, I'd been a ghost in my son's house, useful but invisible, aging but not respected. Now I had my own space, my own life, my own future stretching ahead of me with possibilities I'd thought were closed. I thought about all the other elderly people who found themselves in similar situations, dismissed, managed, infantilized by well-meaning family members who confused age with incompetence. How many of them didn't have my background in law, my financial resources, my support network? How many quietly accepted their diminishment because they'd internalized society's message that old age meant obsolescence? That's when I decided to do something more. I called Margaret the next day. I want to help other people in my situation, I told her. Is there a way to do that? 2 months later, we established a free legal clinic specifically for elderly people dealing with family conflicts and potential financial abuse. We partnered with local senior centers, held monthly workshops on elder rights, and created a resource guide that I distributed widely. I trained as a volunteer advocate, using my legal knowledge and personal experience to help others recognize and resist the kind of diminishment I'd experienced. The work was fulfilling in a way I hadn't anticipated. Each person I helped felt like reclaiming a piece of my own dignity. The 80-year-old man whose daughter had taken over his finances without permission. The 75-year-old woman whose son kept threatening to put her in a home if she didn't comply with his demands. The widower whose stepchildren were trying to contest his late wife's will by claiming he was incompetent. I helped them document their competency, understand their rights, and stand up for themselves. Not all the stories had happy endings. Some families couldn't be salvaged, some relationships were too toxic to repair. But every person left our clinic knowing they had value, knowing they had rights, knowing they weren't alone. Marcus came to one of our workshops 6 months after I'd moved out. He sat in the back and listened as I spoke about recognizing signs of elder financial abuse, about the importance of maintaining independence, about the difference between helping and controlling. Afterward, he waited until everyone else had left. "You're really good at this," he said. "I have personal experience," I replied with a wry smile. "Mom, I want you to know, Patricia and I are separated. We're working on divorce proceedings. The counseling helped me see a lot of things I'd been avoiding. About her, about us, about how I'd learned some really unhealthy patterns from her family about control and money. I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I hadn't wanted his marriage to end. I'm not. Well, I'm sad, but I'm not sorry. This is the right choice. And I've been doing my own work in therapy, dealing with my fear of aging and death, learning to see older people as whole human beings instead of problems to solve. He paused. "Will you have dinner with me sometime? Just us, not as me checking on you, but as, I don't know, as equals." We started having dinner every other week. Sometimes Sophie and Jake came, sometimes it was just the two of us. We built a new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation. He still made mistakes sometimes, still occasionally slipped into a caretaker mode, but he caught himself now, apologized, corrected course. 1 year after I'd moved into my cottage, I got a call from a producer who'd heard about our advocacy work. They wanted to do a feature on our clinic for a local news program. I was reluctant at first. I'd never sought publicity. But Margaret convinced me. "Think of how many people will see it and realize they're not alone," she said. "Think of how many families might recognize themselves and change course before it's too late." The segment aired on a Sunday evening. It showed our clinic, interviewed some of the people we'd helped with their permission, and featured a long conversation with me about my own experience. I was nervous about being so public with my story, about Marcus and Patricia seeing it. But the response was overwhelming. Our clinic's phone rang nonstop for days. We got emails from all over the country, people sharing their own stories, asking for advice, thanking us for giving voice to something they'd experienced but hadn't known how to articulate. We even heard from family members who'd seen themselves in the stories and wanted to do better. Marcus called after the segment aired. "I watched it," he said. "It was hard seeing our story reflected back like that. But I'm glad you told it. I'm glad you're helping other people. And Mom? Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." Patricia never reached out. I heard through Marcus that she'd seen the segment and been furious, claiming I'd made her look bad, that I'd exaggerated everything. I felt a twinge of sadness for her. She still couldn't see what she'd done wrong, still couldn't acknowledge the harm she'd caused. But that was her journey to make, not mine to fix. 2 years after I'd left Marcus's guest house, I stood in my cottage garden on a warm summer evening, watching Milo chase butterflies. Clara came over with fresh tomatoes from her garden, and we chatted about our days. Margaret was visiting for the weekend, and we had plans to attend a lecture on elder law the next day. Sophie and Jake were coming for dinner tomorrow. Sophie wanted to interview me for a school project on inspirational people. My life was full and rich and entirely my own. I'd proven, not just to my family but to myself, that age hadn't diminished me. If anything, it had refined me, given me the clarity to recognize my own worth and the courage to demand respect. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you power. People who think you're too old to understand, too fragile to act, too set in your ways to change, they let their guard down. They show you their true intentions. They give you time to plan and prepare. When Marcus had said, "She's too old to understand," he'd been catastrophically wrong. I'd understood everything. I'd understood that I needed to leave, that I needed to document my competency, that I needed to take control of my own narrative before someone else wrote it for me. I'd understood that staying would mean slowly surrendering my identity until I became the confused, dependent person they already thought I was. Age had given me something more valuable than youth's energy or society's approval. It had given me perspective, the wisdom to recognize manipulation, the confidence to trust my own judgment, the understanding that my worth wasn't determined by others' perceptions, the courage to start over, even when it would have been easier to accept diminishment. I'd proven them wrong, yes. But more importantly, I'd proven to myself that it's never too late to stand up for your own dignity, never too late to demand respect, never too late to start fresh. The number of your years doesn't determine the quality of your life. Your willingness to fight for yourself does. As the sun set over my little cottage, I smiled. I was 74 years old. I was independent, purposeful, and respected. I had work that mattered, relationships that fed my soul, and a future I was actively creating rather than passively accepting. They thought I was too old to understand, but I'd understood perfectly, and I'd done something about it. That's the power they never expected an old woman to have.